got plenty of time for questions, so why don't the three of you come on up here, and we'll open it up to the audience a little bit. David, Christy, Aedhmar, thanks so much. Another round of applause, please, for the three of them. Thanks so much. Come on over. Come on over. Yeah. So we'll center it here. I think that's good. God, those pictures were great from Park.
I know.
I loved it. Was that Hillis sitting in the? It was Hillis, right? Yeah.
Right?
God.
You know them.
I know some of them. Yes, I wasn't invited to the British Airways flight or to the media event. No, so I'm definitely not A-list.
Listen, you're not based in Silicon Valley.
Right, that's right. That's true.
Otherwise, you'd have been there.
Exactly. So before I ask a question, David, your little video there at the end, I think, could easily be confused with just a sort of corporate logo modification thing for Dow. I was particularly interested in the sphere inside the square with the diamonds notion of challenges for governance. I mean, a company like Dow, which deals with regulators, which deals with communities, which deals with protesters, and of course has its shareholders to deal with. What is the inside conversation, insofar as you could share it with us, about this problem for governance to solve some of these problems going forward? Because that really had some insights that I was sort of tuning it out, and then all of a sudden it said, whoa. That's interesting.
Governance is, frankly, critical to the success of all of the issues, right? So I think what we've learned, our industry's been around a while. It's had its ups, it's had its downs. And we've certainly seen the downside of solving an immediate customer need and creating a bigger problem than the solution, right? So what you learn is that there's a place for governance, there's a place for government, and it needs to be a partnership. And you need to look holistically at the problem. When we talk about the circular economy, that's a great example. If we solve a point problem with a customer, we may have a better solution if we work across the value chain, across government entities, and we try to solve the full circle. What's going to happen end of life to all the products that go out the door? How do we manage that? So we used to call it cradle to grave. Now we talk about hand footprint. But this is really a core value of our company. It's a big change. It's a big change, and we want to lead in this space. So as a company, this was a very ambitious effort. It's not about a corporate logo. It's about a culture change in how we approach the market, our customers, and engage in society.
And Ban Ki-moon at an event that I was at 3 weeks ago said that the biggest challenge, the biggest disruptive challenge facing the world today, outside of some of the problems that you've talked about in healthcare and that we talk about, famine and that sort of thing, is the challenge to the nation state. That the nation state is quickly becoming irrelevant. Just look at what's going on in the Mediterranean. It's not necessarily a governing model that's going to work, and the sort of fight between workers and corporations and governments and parties is definitely not a model that's going to work.
We would call that a partnership, not a fight.
Yeah, exactly. In the media, we call it fights.
Right.
All right, questions out here for any of the people here on the panel. Come on, I know you guys aren't shy. Right over here, Clint.
David, I've got a question for you from Dow related to product development and innovation in the sectors of energy and water, because there's such a strong nexus between those two. The amount of energy necessary to treat and process water, your membranes, the amount of water necessary to create steam and drive energy and cooling.
Yep.
What are some of the innovations? What is some of the new thinking that's going to help us protect some of those vital resources in your product line?
Absolutely, and you brought up reverse osmosis membranes, right? Which is a technology that's really going gangbusters because there's such a water need, especially in China. Middle East makes sense, right? And we're even seeing it now in North America and the West, coming in areas like Los Angeles. So that lower energy footprint, it's not just about, there's a fundamental efficiency of how well you can do reverse osmosis. So ultimately, there's going to have to be a bit flip there. And we're going to have to look at other technologies. But within that reverse osmosis space, we focus very much on long-term, low energy performance, not just performing immediately with low energy, but really managing fouling and other issues that are around that. We think about the entire nexus. In fact, we have a business structure in that space. It's called energy and water. So we put our energy businesses together as well as with our water business. And that includes everything from our solar business, which includes a subsidiary we have called Nuvisun, which makes SIG solar cells out in Silicon Valley, all the way through to this reverse osmosis product, to even products that we put into oil and gas extraction.
How would you say that marketing is less linear today than it once was, in the sense that predicting what consumers will do as the sort of basic problem of marketing is really a fundamentally different kind of problem when corporations look at what does marketing mean today.
In some respects, I always go back to the fundamental belief that human nature is the same regardless of how much changes. And so what you're seeing today, and what I think is particularly helpful, is that as a result of social media and as a result of technology and innovation and the ability to communicate across multiple platforms, what we're finding now is that the ability to understand and interpret human behavior and people's emotions with data and so on is actually allowing us to be way more targeted and way more effective than we had been historically. But I do think while we have greater access to that information and greater understanding, at the same time I feel that how people behave and what they do online and offline is still fundamentally the same. I always use the notion that growing up in Ireland, we went to church and then we all gathered afterwards and had our discussions. And you're seeing those communities now just spread across different countries across the world in much greater scale, but people are still behaving the way they always have. People find communities of interest, and then they leverage that community, and they reference, they trust, and engage with those different communities. So we have greater access to that information. It's allowing us to be more effective, but I think the fundamentals are still very much the same.
The Irish had it right. Churches and pubs scale.
Well, exactly,
Yeah, isn't
exactly,
that basically
exactly,
how it goes?
exactly.
Christy, speaking of expanding on this idea of human nature, how much is confidence an issue when you deal with your clients? When basically you're trying to encourage people to use tools that maybe they aren't familiar with to solve problems that they wish they had a better sort of idea of how to solve. I mean, in the 90s, Aedhmar talked about this a little bit, that there was such a notion of exactitude and metrics, and basically you were using data to get a precise answer, when in fact what you're looking at is social media that gives you an imprecise answer, but maybe one that's more valuable. How do you get people to be confident enough to accept imprecision as a tool to solve problems?
I would say it's often the combination of both. So definitely leveraging social data, leveraging social networks to learn and gain insight, but then we don't stop doing some of the things, the tools that we've used in the past that give us that confidence. So I think you need to have the combination of both together to really build that, because otherwise, you could develop something and you put it out there, it's not broadly relevant. You've just talked to a small group of people.
Yeah, you got the right answer,
yeah,
but
exactly.
nobody cares. That
Yeah,
sort of thing.
exactly.
Yeah. How much hand-holding do you have to do with clients to use the social media tools that you use? Or are they very, very sophisticated? How much has changed in the last even few years in the work that you've done?
Yeah, I would say it's changed a lot. Our SMX division within Ipsos is just about 3 years old, and I actually came from a more traditional research background and quantitative research, actually. So I've definitely kind of evolved along with some of the clients that I work with, being more open to some of these methods. And I think the market is changing. People are embracing social media, they're embracing big data, all of that stuff. So I think they're very open to it now.
I'll just add to that. I would agree things are changing, but I still would say that at an executive level, there's a lot of hand-holding as well. I mean, I think as you see a new generation emerge in leadership positions, that's when things will really change. But, we do social executive programs where we literally have to take executives and step by step build their confidence and their understanding of a lot of tools they've never ever used. And a lot of them still feel this is kids stuff. My kids use Facebook, my kids are on LinkedIn, but they have also a huge fear. But I think it's almost the same fear that an executive has when they sit in front of a journalist, right? It's a lack of control. What's going to happen? How do I, how am I going to ensure that the outcome is completely within my control? And it's not. So from that perspective, it hasn't changed. It's just a matter of really taking them step by step.
Should I want them to be uncomfortable, or should I want them to be comfortable as a journalist? Because old media is I want them to be uncomfortable.
Right.
New media maybe suggests I want them to be comfortable, but the audience wants me to get the truth out of them. So how does that work?
Well, from my perspective, in an era when everything is telling us that we have to drive towards transparency, then inherent in the notion of transparency is trust. And so, to me, a trusted relationship with a journalist, where not that they're sitting in fear, but they actually feel comfortable that they can share information, is a far better environment in order to get the right story. So I think the same is true online. I think now it's not just what the executives say. The corporation's got a whole army of communicators. Everything that comes out of a corporation online is a representation of that brand. So that trust has got to infuse the entire corporation from top to bottom. And so as a result of that, I think executives do need to feel comfortable as well as employees.
Other questions out here? Right over here.
What percentage of outside of consumer-based products and fashion does Twitter, Facebook, social media have in the business about? And I agree with the statement that I think it's going to take a generational change at the top in order to make that more mainstream.
You're asking for which industries is it relevant,
Yes.
or okay?
Beyond those two, the consumer, which laundry soap I use or which facial scrub I use versus, are we talking about, for example, generators? Are we talking about other larger objects, industry-wise?
What do you think, David? Is he a Lifebuoy guy or a magic soap guy?
He's a Dove guy.
Dove guy. Okay, go ahead.
Am I right? Did I get it right? No.
I think outside of consumer goods, even things that require investment in research on behalf of the consumer. I mean, they're going to be going out to social media and to the internet to do research and that sort of thing. So I don't think it is just CPG types of products necessarily.
More disinformation or accurate information disseminated?
Is it more? I'm sorry.
More accurate or inaccurate information disseminated via social media?
Accurate or inaccurate? I think it's just different information. I don't know if it's more or less accurate. I think you do get, especially in social media, you get more of the extremes of the opinions. So people that are really, really happy with something or people really pissed off about something. So I think that the truth might be somewhere in the middle, and that's where other forms of research or other data can help inform and tell the whole story. But I don't know that it's inaccurate data, it's just different data.
I hear the question that you're asking, and I get it a lot in media, what's truth, what's not truth. And someone once told me who's actually a shrimper down in New Orleans when I was covering Katrina. And we were in some sort of drunken conversation, God knows what, but it got onto this subject of authority and what is, and he was very internet sophisticated because he had a boat that he loved to communicate with his friends. He was kind of like a CB radio guy on a boat, and he said that the internet and this concern about disinformation because of the vastness of the data that comes from the internet is like the difference between a fish that you eat and the entire ocean. If you say, is cod edible? People know what you're talking about, and there's a clear answer to that question. But if you stand by the ocean and look out at the waves coming in and say, is the ocean edible? The question suddenly has no meaning. And as Christy was trying to say, it sort of depends on what your goal is, what you're fishing for, and the quality of the questions that you ask that's going to determine whether something is disinformation or whether it's quality information. And again, it comes back to trust in some ways, that the quality of the information comes out of the trust of the relationship that produces the information.
Yeah.
I suspect you want to expand on that.
I just to two parts of your question. The first one was, non-consumer-based products and the relevance of social media. I would say it's highly relevant, not just social, but online media, let's say, rather than just describing it as social. So from research we've done, a CTO in making a decision to purchase technology is influenced by 7 different people in making that decision. And more than 50% of those 7 people have no technology background whatsoever. So the fact that in a B2B enterprise, they are influenced, it's going back to that point. Why is it important for IBM, for the consumer to have a strong point of view, positive point of view about their brand, even though they'll never buy the product? It's because they influence those who do. And to the point about the second half was just notion of trust. I think how social media and online media is used varies at different points of your decision-making cycle. So I think when somebody is just trying to make a very broad decision and get input and opinion, then they toss it out to all their friends and those that they trust most, you know, using things like Facebook platforms and so on. But when they get to the point where they're trying to make a decision between one product or another, and they've really honed their decision making, where they're at the point of purchase, then they go to more trusted sites. And that's typically, in many industries, it would be journalists who have reviewed those products or in some way have an opinion. But, you know, trust comes into it. And so therefore, their media information changes at the point of purchase. What you want to do then is you want to transfer that purchase into them being an advocate, because you want them to then go online and say, I made this purchase, it was fantastic, and I'm going to tell all my friends. And so what you're seeing there is a cycle of how social media and how online information is used. But I think we have very savvy consumers who understand what's trustworthy and what's just noise in the system.
And it's people who can live in the asymptote, right? Sort of what I was saying this morning, that there's a lot of disinformation that lives at a very low value level on the internet, and just in general. You know, the internet really doesn't need to even be said here. But as you get close to the decision point, as you move along that access to the decision point, then suddenly the asymptote really shoots up to the vertical, and then trust is hugely important. And as you go microseconds to the decision point, and if you can function in that asymptote where trust is really, really, really important, that's when you're going to make quality decisions, not waste a lot of your time, not be the victim of pranks, and not accumulate a lot of cat pictures in your inbox. So, Christy, I got one question for you, and then I'm going to give David the final thoughts here. You're an old quanta person, right?
Yeah.
You're a quantitative person.
Yeah.
How have you had to sort of modify your own sort of personal orientation to data in this new world? And I noticed that you're about to have an experience that maybe is not so quanta. It's going to be very subjecto pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a big change for me, and I had been doing quantitative research for about 10 years when I switched to the social media group, and it's definitely embracing the qualitative nature of what we do, definitely, and not having to rely on data all the time, and realizing when both have a role and when both are important, and yeah, so it was definitely a big culture shift for me personally, but yeah.
As someone with 5 kids, I will just say, when he or she starts to crawl is not important, okay? They will tell you that when is important, it's not important, okay? I assure you.
She has an Edison or an Einstein.
Yeah, and you don't find that out for a long, long, long time. They're all Edisons and Einsteins until you get to the college admissions process, and that's the subject for another session. David, take us out. Take us out. Final thoughts?
Final thoughts. I think as a final thoughts, again, I want to issue the challenge to everybody here. So I love the coffee cards.
Good.
We've got to work together across value chains. We've got to partner. And it's not just company to company and company to customer. I do encourage you to engage with your legislators, your policymakers, and help smart decisions get made that benefit society.
Thanks so much. We've got 30 minutes, network. We'll see you back here for our final session. Thanks.